There are many times as an SSIS developer that you will need to handcraft your own source files so that you can develop a package, and then later on you'll throw those files away and you'll use dynamically generated data. Let me give you an example because this is going to lead into a discussion of what we call control files. So let's say that you are asked to create an SSIS package that wires up to a DB2 server and creates a text file based off of that that stores X number of rows and then loads it up into a SQL server. So it does an export from DB2 to text and then an import in from text to SQL server. And maybe there's things in between, maybe there's not. Unimportant here. But here's what's important. To actually do the export from DB2 to the text file takes 45 minutes. Whew, that's a long time. So you've got to sit there and do development, and you've got two choices really. Every time you test your package, you can wait 45 minutes for DB2 to finish downloading, or you can find one way to do kind of a mock-up or to do some testing. Now there's a couple of different techniques for this. One technique would be to change up your DB2 query so that it only returned, say, 3 rows. That way you're not having to wait 45 minutes for it to hook up. That technique doesn't always work though, because you don't, or you may not in the development environment actually have access to the server that you need to hook up to. So you may have to do option number 2, which is handcraft the file yourself, which is actually go down to Excel or to Notepad or whatever the tool is that you're going to use to create the source text file. So that's what I'm going to show you here is how to use a control file. A control file is nothing more than a mock-up, some sample data, fake data, substitute data, whatever you want to call it. It is simply a tool that allows you to develop your SSIS package in your development environment so that it mimics what production is going to be. And then when you're ready for production, you just simply remove the control file and now you replace it with the live data. Just give me an example. Give me a second here. I'm going to come up with just a real quick example here. Let's say I'll mock up that example that we talked about right there. So here we'll grab a data flow and we'll say export DB2 to text. I can't use that. And then after that we would say import text to SQL Server. Okay, so very simple, and I'm not going to go into too much detail here. I'm just going to use the control file. That's kind of the example here, is how to create the control file. So let's say that I'm in the development environment, and for whatever reason, whether it's on a different network, or whether I'm on a laptop that's disconnected from the company intranet, for whatever reason, I can't access the DB2. Okay, so I can't do it. Okay, well, I don't have to stop. I can disable that particular task, and now I can focus on this one, provided that I know the schema that I need to use. So let's say, and I'm going to load up a text file here. So let's just take vendor ID, name, and you'd probably have a lot more columns and lots of numbers and things like that, but I'm just going to keep it simple. So here's Scott's sock store and Miracle Whip. I just saw a commercial for them. And let's say I'm looking around my office now to find products here. Western Digital, we're probably all familiar with them. And so let's say that this is a mock-up of the type of data that would come back from DB2. So I need to know a couple of things here. I need to know the column names. I need to know the data types, enough so that I can make some sample data. And I probably need to know the order of the columns, although to be fair, that part's not as important as the previous two. So I need to know the columns and the data types, right? And then I can make some sample data. So I'm just going to hit save, put this on my C as vendors.txt. I mean, not a whole lot of stuff here. But I can now use this as my control file. I can go now to my import, and I can add now my flat file source. And if you kind of get it by this point, if you understand what I'm talking about, you can stop this video. I'm not really going to show you anything other than how to actually take that text file and load it up. But if you want to go a little deeper, I'll take you through here. All right, so flat file source, I wire up a connection manager. So I go, I'll just call it source. And I go grab it on the root of C, which is of course not where you should put those. There are column names in the first data row. The end of the row is specified by a control line feed or a new line character, basically. It is a delimited type of file. I don't have any qualifications around the text columns. Very common, you'd put like a double quotes around text, but I don't have that. Let's see, it automatically picks up that there are two different columns. And when we take a look at the advanced, though, because it's coming from a text file, the data types are just simply string 50. All right, well, this is where knowing what the actual data types of the source data are going to really be helpful. Also, knowing the destination data types in SQL Server are going to be very helpful. So I would say, like for the vendor ID, no, that's not a string, that's a signed integer. Let me find that. 4-byte signed integer, and then for the name it's going to be a Unicode string, and it's going to be 128 characters, for example. Okay, so I need to know what I'm matching up, the source data type with the destination data type. And I say, okay, you can see the columns. You could rename them in the output if you needed to. So these are the columns available. These are the columns that actually come from the text file. These are what you want to name them in your package. Leave them the same. And I'll just put it into a destination here, a SQL server. Let's make a connection manager for it. We'll use the temp DB. Of course, you'd use a real table. I will have SQL Server auto-generate the table. It will default to naming it SQL Server destination. The column names will be nullable. There's a couple of goofy things here. We'll just call this vendor. And we'll make the vendor ID not null and make a primary key. And we'll make the name not null. So you can see the script file. I'm not going to include this script file in the video because a couple of lines of code right there. There's nothing really difficult about that. But the point is, right here, when I say OK, SSIS is actually going to wire it up. It's hooking up to SQL Server and it has just executed that particular piece of code. So we say OK, get a weird error message there, but you see our vendor table, and it in fact does have the two columns we asked for. Map the columns. Thankfully, they have the same name, so therefore they map up. If they didn't, if they were not correct, just delete the lines and drag and drop or choose them over here. I have nothing else fancy to do, but now I have a control file. It's a sample file. It has some basic data, and I can go execute my package just to verify that it actually runs. And now let's go take a look in that table. We used the temp DB for that one. So I just say select all from, and let's use temp DB, not that. Not you, Mr. MDX. And dbo.vendor. And now we know, looking at it here, hey, you know what? Check, it works. It's almost a little bit like unit testing. We just designed a little test to tell us whether or not this particular task works. Now we can deploy this to our actual main server. We can now re-enable this. We need to make sure we change our source connection manager to be, instead of the vendors.txt, to be whatever the file name that's going to be exported from the first part. I'm going to show you later on. Right now we're in chapter 4 and we haven't really covered expressions yet. We're going to cover expressions in chapter 5, and I'll show you how you can have that changed at runtime.